everybody. Today we're going to work on a Josef Albers inspired collage. Josef Albers was an artist who focused a lot on non-objective artwork, meaning artwork that had no subject matter at all, just a bunch of colors and shapes and lines put together to create a really nice composition. He's most famous for his squares, repeating squares, having squares inside of squares, playing with color and layering squares in different ways. So we're going to create our collage in a similar spirit of him. So what you'll need for this project is a black background, although you could use white or any other color, I suppose. We just want something that's neutral so that the colors of your project will just pop right out of it. You're going to need 3 different colored square pieces of paper. If you don't know how to make square paper, I will show you in just a moment. You'll also need a glue stick, a pair of scissors, and a pencil. So let's get going. Now, if you don't have square paper already pre-cut in a square shape, you can take any size paper you want and take one corner of it and match that corner off to the side here. So this lower part is going to get matched with this side. So you're going to draw it up and fold it into a triangle shape. And then this part right here is what's going to get cut off. So I'll take my pair of scissors and I'll just cut neatly along this part that's hanging off. And then when I open it back up again, I should have a nice square shaped piece of paper. So that's a little trick. If you don't have pre-cut square pieces of paper or a paper cutter to make sure they're square, you can just do that and you're all set. All right, the first thing we're going to do is take our square pieces of paper and fold them in half. It doesn't matter which direction you fold them in, they are perfect squares, so all sides are equal. So I'm going to take these and fold them in half every single time. All right, try hard to get them to line up when you fold them so that they're not off center. You do want them to be pretty even so that when you make your drawings and your cuts, they will come out the right way that you want them to. Now, for this next part, you can use your pencil and you can either draw with your hand and just kind of go for it, or if you feel a little bit more comfortable, you can get a ruler or straight edge to make sure your lines are perfect. What we're going to end up doing here is we're going to be drawing a series of lines that when we cut them out will create a series of squares out of this one sheet. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to take my pencil, and I don't want to get super close because that will create too skinny of lines that will probably rip and break if I cut them. I also don't want them to be too fat because then I won't have enough to do a lot. So try to give it a little bit of a decent gap. Draw a line across and then draw a line straight down on the long side, and then finally come back to the center. When you do this drawing, make sure the open side is over here and that you are working from the folded side. That's a really important thing. So always double check, make sure you're working from the folded side when you do your first drawing, and that you do not go to the edge on the open side. All right, after I've done one, I'm going to do a second one, giving it a little bit of space in between. I'm going to do a third one, and if I have room, I'll do one last little fourth one. Okay, and you're going to repeat this process for all 3 of your squares. If you end up being able to fit 1 extra line in there, so instead of 4 or 5, that's awesome. If you end up only being able to fit 3 in, that's okay too. Try to stay around the number 4 though. I've drawn on all 3 of my different colored squares. Now I'm ready to start cutting. Again, before you start cutting, make sure you drew them the right way. So if you open it and the drawings are right on the seam, then you did it the right way. So let me show you what we ended up with. Here I have 5 pieces that I was able to cut out by just going over the lines that I drew on my square. So when you open them up, you end up with multiple squares in multiple sizes, and if you were to lay them inside each other, they would fit quite perfectly again. But if you were to separate them, they'd be able to be arranged in any number of ways that could create some interesting shapes and designs. Let's cut the rest of ours and then we'll get going. cut out all our shapes and laid them out, we're ready to start coming up with some arrangements. Now we have an awful lot of pieces here, and honestly, realistically, this many pieces is not going to fit comfortably on this size background. A larger paper that will fit all of the pieces on, that is awesome. If you end up making your squares a little bit smaller so that they fit a little better, that is also awesome. The other option is what I'm going to do, which is I'm going to pick and choose some of the pieces. So some of the pieces are going to stay glued onto the paper, and some of the pieces I'm not going to end up using at all. So it just depends on what you can fit and what is going to be a nice arrangement. So let's get to working on our composition. A composition is an arrangement that you create with your shapes and colors, and it is something that you want to have be appealing to your audience, something that's going to be pleasing to the eye and look really interesting. Think about where shapes are being laid and what sort of movement or patterns you're creating. And before we end up doing any gluing, we want to work on the composition. Once you glue something, it's stuck there. So we want to make sure that the arrangement we're working on is something that we're going to enjoy. So there's a number of ways you can do this. You can mix and match colors together. And you can do a series of squares like this where we have them all mixed and matched together. You could do some overlapping with different size squares, them in different arrangements throughout your paper. And you can try playing with sort of an interesting repetition effect where you have the same colors but kind of staggered so that it creates some interesting designs and shapes to it. And with this, you could put more that are doing the same exact thing but in a different position on your paper. So think about your arrangement when you're working on this. Do you want to keep the color schemes together? Do you want to mix colors together so that you end up creating new color schemes and new color arrangements, similar to how the artist that we're studying did, where we layer different colors together until we get a final interesting image assembled? And do that multiple times throughout your picture? Or do you want to stagger and overlap and do something interesting? So I'm going to play around with my composition for a little bit until I get what I like, and then we'll meet back together and we'll talk about gluing. Okay, once you figure out what your arrangement's going to be, which could take a while, this took me quite a while to sort of play around with and figure out what to put under, what I wanted to put on top, you can get ready to start. Now, a couple things I want to point out. I did have this square hanging off the edge. I really liked having a little bit of that black outline there. So after I glue this down, I will probably go in and cut off the excess that's hanging off. Or I might decide to leave it actually. It might look kind of interesting having some of this go off of the background page. It kind of makes it a little bit more interesting to me. I also really did a little splice of yellow over here, and I didn't have any more pieces. So once I was certain that this is the way I wanted it and I was not going to be using these extra pieces, I then went into this piece and I cut a little snippet out so that I could put it over here. So if you want to use any of that you know officially are going to be scraps, feel free to cut those up and change things around if you need to. And now that I'm ready to start gluing, I'm going to start with the things that are underneath and then work my way up to the top, being really careful not to mess with my arrangement too much. When you do the gluing, try to glue the actual piece, not necessarily just glue onto the background, because that won't really make your project stick down very well. So let's get going. There I have my finished non-objective collage using just squares and colors. I decided at the end I was going to leave these just hanging off the edge. I really like how it looks like my project's kind of escaping the page, and that's just a personal choice I made. If you don't like that, of course you can go in and snip off the extra, but I think it looks really cool. And I really wanted to be conscious of the fact that I wanted to make sure it felt a little balanced, so I had some filled in pieces around, some that were spread out, and I'm really pleased with this. So I hope you guys had fun doing this collage with me, and I can't wait to see some of the colors and the patterns and the choices you decided to make.